when necessary every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m. at the Gold Coast and Nathan campuses. So we hope you enjoy this session today, and we really look forward to meeting with you in the advisory. Thanks, Millie.
Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, so moving on to just quick introduction of how today's session is going to work. So like I said, we have a really special guest from our Rachael Bosnjak, who is also one of our proud alumnus as well. She did her law degree as well as MBA, and which I'm going to make a proper introduction in a few moments. So just hang in with me here. So she's also going to, so today's really main part of session is presented by Rachael, who is going to give you really good, insightful information about visa and migration information. And then also we'll have a live Q&A session, which also will be moderated by myself, Melinda, and Claire. And you will also have the interactive Q&A with Rachael today. Okay, so quick just to remind about today's housekeeping rules. Some of you might be curious whether or not we're going to share today's recording. Of course we will. So Rachael has kindly agreed with us and give us permission to actually share this recording for today's presentation. So once we finish today's event, we will be able to send you the copy of today's presentation slide as well as the recording. So it's just simply keep an eye on your university email inbox. We will get it back. Get in touch with you shortly after we finish today's event. But also, make sure you use Q&A function. I'm pretty confident you will be able to see the icon if you can just hover around your mouse on the top somewhere banner from the webinar link to room today. So if you do have any questions that you want to submit, then you can use this Q&A function to be able to submit your questions. And also thank you for those of you who actually submitted your questions prior to today's webinar. So Rachael and our team had a chance to look at your questions, and then that question will be also addressed from Rachael today's presentation slide as well. Okay, so without further ado, let me now properly introduce our main presenter, Rachael Bosnjak, who is one of our very proud alumnus as well. She did our Bachelor of Law degree, Criminology Justice, but also her MBA degree here at Griffith University. Most importantly, she is also founding director of the Passage Migration Consulting services here. For those of you who haven't had a chance to check out her YouTube here, which is the Diary of Migration Lawyers, I do actually strongly encourage you to check out her YouTube platform as well. Okay, so thank you, Rachael, for joining us again, giving up your time. So what I might do, I might just stop sharing my presentation slide, and then I'll hand it over to you. So let me know when you're ready.
I'll just unmute myself. I'm
yes.
Ready to go. One sec. Okay. Ooh. Okay. Hold on. Sorry, I'm just going to switch screens around. Sorry, everybody. You'd think with a million webinars online by now I'd know how to use my computer. Okay. Again. That. And now. All right, you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, we can see your slide. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the world, or Queensland or Brisbane or Gold Coast or wherever you are. It's pretty much freezing in Queensland if you're here. I think this is snowing weather for Queenslanders. So I have double layers on this morning. So it is June, and I am heading to Tasmania in a couple of weeks, so that's exciting. So as Mooney mentioned, thank you so much, Mooney, for the intro. I will be presenting to you today about, I guess, giving you a little bit more education on visa options, what's out there, what's happening with 485, what's going on in the world of immigration at the moment, just because things are a bit mental, to be perfectly honest. And it's even in being in the profession every day, sometimes it's hard to keep up with all the things that are going on. So my plan today is to try and give you a little bit more insight, information as to exactly what's going on. I might not answer every single person's question, but there will be a special calendar opening for all of you at the end of this presentation, which I will give you the secret link for. And as Moody mentioned, the slides will be provided to you, as will a bunch of resources that might be able to assist you in your migration journeys. So as Moody said, use the Q&A function, and at the end, I will try and get to as many questions as possible. I do like to talk, so I'm going to try and keep this to sort of 45 minutes to an hour so we can hand over to all of you so that we can then start to answer those burning questions that you have. So let's get started. So who am I? So as Moody mentioned, I'm Rachael. I'm an immigration lawyer. I've been practicing in immigration law for predominantly pretty much for about 12 years. So that's been in both the largest immigration law firm in the world, but also in smaller practices around Australia. I've worked in every state or territory of Australia, except for Canberra, but I did go to Canberra recently and attended the High Court, and I was on a road trip, so I had leopard print socks and tights on, and luckily the High Court was not sitting that day. And as a result, essentially, of this experience, working in big practices, small practices, and as Mooney said, doing my MBA, I decided that it would be a good idea to start my own practice. And the reason for that really was to be able to bring humanness and authenticity to the way that I practice law. I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect for me between the way that law was done and the way that I thought things, I would like people to kind of be, things to be done and people to kind of be on a journey with their lawyer rather than kind of being talked at. And so Passage Migration Consulting was born in September 2021. So we're about to have our second birthday in a few months. And I've just actually hired some Griffith Law students, which are amazing. So there we go. And as you can see by that tinsel backdrop, and if you have had a chance to have a look at the YouTube channel, I am not your average lawyer. It's not often that you'll sit down at a webinar with a lawyer that has, is dressed in Goldman and bright pink lipstick. So that is me. We are going to cover today some immigration updates on what's going on. We're going to talk a lot about the subclass 485, and that is really because that is where a lot of you are at in your journey. Once you get to the end of your student visa, that's the natural next step. I'm also going to briefly touch on some other visa opportunities. And for example, if you can't get a 485 or you have already had a 485 in the past, or you're just looking for something maybe a bit of a longer term planning phase, then we're going to talk about other visa opportunities. I'm also going to talk to you about how to properly work with a lawyer or migration agent, and it might just kind of help that discussion drive a bit further. I'm going to talk about resources, but the resources aren't in this pack because you can't click them, and I didn't even think to do a QR code. Good idea, Mooney. I could have done that this morning. But what I will do is I'll put some resources together and make sure they come out with the slides, and then we will run into the Q&A. So let's get started. So the immigration updates. So the big one that all of you need to consider is that from 1 July, work restrictions are going to be back in place. And so that, though it used to be 40 hours a fortnight, it's now 48 hours per fortnight, unless you are currently and continuing to work in the aged care sector. So that is a big one. Don't forget that you are responsible for monitoring your work hours, not your employer. And if you think that you can maybe work full-time still and you won't get caught, I can tell you it's certainly possible because the Department of Home Affairs has the ability to cross-reference your tax records. And if you work longer than your allotted hours and you're getting paid, significantly more than what 48 hours per fortnight would give you, then it is possible that the government can track you down and potentially, at worst, cancel your visa. So be careful of that and keep that in mind. There are some, as you're all aware, there was some transitional and there's some more relaxed arrangements happening at the moment for students that had studies or visas affected by COVID. Now, I'm going to try and touch on most of the things throughout this presentation because there was lots of relaxing and transitional and bits and pieces that I think have completely confused everyone as to where they are and what they're supposed to be doing and where they fit in the migration space in Australia. And then the other big one where there's not too much information yet, but some graduate visa holders will have access to longer stay periods where they have qualifications in critical sectors. Now, that change is happening as a result, from 1 July, as a result of a big review of the migration program, and also a review of what's happening in the world, what's happening more in Australia rather than the world, the Australian labour market, to try and understand how we can kind of help those really struggling critical labour sectors. And so not too much information. I thought by the time we got to today, there'd be lots of information available on that, but unfortunately not yet. So that is something that we can, I guess, a bit of a watch this space. So they're probably the 3 big things that we really need to consider at the moment around what's changed. And as I said, I will try and touch on this transition and relaxed arrangements matter as we go throughout. Now, the big thing, so this slide purposely looks like this. So big flashing lights, it's important. So the next 2 slides are a little bit like this, because these are 2 things that what I want to do is bring your attention to them. As international students, I feel like sometimes you don't necessarily have all of the information you need to make the right decision. And so this slide and the next slide will really give you a little bit more information about how your occupation or what you study, what you choose to be your career path, might affect your ability to apply for visas in Australia. So there's a thing called the skilled occupation list, and I'm sure if any of you have been here for more than 5 minutes in Australia, you'll be very much aware of what a skilled occupation list. Skilled occupation list essentially dictates the ability to be able to obtain a skilled visa in Australia, and it further dictates how long you might be able to stay, if you can get access to permanent residency, whether you have to be in a regional area. Currently, the skilled occupation list is broken down into 3 different lists, potentially 4 if you take on the state list as well. So the skilled occupation lists at the moment are the medium to long-term skills shortage list, which is we call it the MITSL, or the short-term skilled occupation list, which is the STSL, which makes no sense. So I just call that one the Schnitzel. So you've got your MITSL, your Schnitzel, and then you've got your role, which is the regional occupation list. So if you have an occupation on the medium to long-term skills shortage list, you are the winner. That is probably the most favourable. The reason why it's the most favourable is because you have access to a longer sponsored work visa, for example. You also have access to independent permanent pathways and also employer-sponsored permanent pathways. The short-term skilled occupation list, while it doesn't necessarily offer as much freedom as the MITSL, it does provide you access to employer-sponsored visas, potentially independent state-sponsored options. And this is where you're going to start to kind of move into more regional centres, and that might be where you be able to kind of have a long-term migration journey in Australia. And then the regional occupation list, as you would imagine, that is specific to regional areas. And that would mean any visa that you get generally that is associated with the regional occupation list, you would need to be in a regional area. So I will provide a link to the skilled occupation list. And what you can do is that you can search your occupation or chosen career path. And once you search that, you'll be able to know what the code is, what the occupation is, where you would get your skills assessed, and what visas you have access to. So that's a really good, easy resource to be able to start to set yourself up and start to build your educational knowledge around what you're going to be able to do in your chosen career path. So that's the first big point I wanted you to take away today. The next one is a very detailed slide, again, because you're going to get a copy of this pack. So what I want to do is make sure we understand what the Australian study requirement is. So if we're looking at something like a graduate visa, for example, this is essentially the break or make of your visa. If you don't meet the Australian study requirement, generally you're not going to have access for 485 unless, for example, some exemption applies. So it goes without saying that it has to be a registered CRICOS course. Obviously, if you attended at Griffith University, that box is ticked. You must have completed the course or courses in 16 calendar months, or at least 16 calendar months, and within at least 2 academic years of study. So what does that mean? So 2 academic years of study means 46 weeks or at least 92 weeks for the full course duration. So keep in mind that if, so the way that they kind of map out how long a course is supposed to take is what it says on the Cricos website. So you can't kind of artificially create a longer course by, you know, moving subjects or extending out your student visa or something like this. If Cricos says the course only goes for 76 weeks or something like this, that means the course only goes for that long. And you can't claim, you wouldn't necessarily be able to claim the Australian study requirement on its own for that course. You also need to be holding a visa authorising study. So either you're on a student visa or maybe you're on a visa that your parents are in Australia as workers and you are being able to study as a result of that visa. Very important that you have something that allows you to study. So you can't be on a tourist visa, for example, for long-term study. You can't be on some other visa. When you're thinking of the end date of your course or the end date and the start date, so when we're thinking about those 2 academic years, so that is essentially when school starts, so your orientation or week 1, when school starts, right through to the day that you receive results to say that you're going to be able to pass the course. So it's not when your graduation ceremony happens, because as many of you might know, sometimes graduation ceremonies are delayed for one reason or another, and they might also be months after you can actually complete your studies. And that becomes a bit of a point of stress for people, because if you can't undertake a graduation ceremony, you have to wait to do that to launch the visa, then that could delay things and you might end up missing the deadlines that you need to meet. So the critical date is when you have got the information to say that, yes, you passed the course. It's not necessarily when you get that certificate and you do your thingo, I can't remember what it's called, when you get across that stage. When you're looking at packaged or nested courses, you need to think what you're doing must lead into each other. So you might, for example, do a diploma or graduate diploma in this case, and then move into a master's, or you might do a bachelor and then move into a master's. Some master's courses I know because I had friends in the international student community at Griffith that did the MBA, and that program didn't meet the 2 academic years of study at the time that they were attending. So it's important to know if your course is going to meet that, and if you can maybe package or nest courses that are going to help you meet that 2 years. Importantly, unless you're going to get credit from one course to move into the next course, packaged or nested courses aren't going to help you towards the 2-year requirement or 2 academic years of studies. So example of that might be an English course into a master's. So an English course, it's more like a prerequisite to get into a master's course. You kind of have to speak a certain level of English to get there. So just be very careful if you're someone that has packaged or nested courses, to really understand if each of those courses are going to get you to where you want to go. If you're changing courses or course providers where you're receiving credit for the time spent in the first course. So, for example, if you originally started doing a Bachelor of Nursing and you've now changed to a Bachelor of Science, and when you started a Bachelor of Science, you received credits for that Bachelor for the first Bachelor into the second one, then that time spent towards your academic years of study will be considered. If you go from something like Bachelor of Nursing to Bachelor of Multimedia Design, then it's highly unlikely that those things are going to be counted as credit, and it will mean that you will need to rethink this two years of academic study to make sure you still meet the requirement. Overlapping courses completed at the same time are not going to be considered on top of each other, so you can't do 2 diplomas or trade qualifications at once and then try and stack them to meet the academic years. Time spent, as I mentioned, cannot be artificially extended, And generally only 25% of the course can be online unless you're affected by COVID-19. And that is a whole other world, which we're all kind of aware of. So that's the other big one that I wanted you to, that's an important slide, as you can tell by the big important stamp on that. So have a look at that and just see how that sits with you and where you're at in your studies. Now, let's jump into the 485 in a little bit more detail. So this slide is the very basics of what you need. So you need to be in Australia when you lodge this visa, unless for some reason you're COVID affected and you couldn't be in Australia to lodge the application. You had not previously held a 476, which is an old visa, which probably would not affect really any of you unless you're coming back to Australia to do a second round of study. So it's a 476 or a 485. Either of those you shouldn't have held in the past, unless, for example, an exemption applies. For example, if you need to apply for a replacement 485 as a result of COVID or not being able to be in the country. So you must nominate whatever the correct stream is for your certain circumstances, and I'll run into the streams in a little bit. So you've got the replacement, the post-study work, or the graduate work. Someone asked in one of the questions as to what English level we need to provide. So it's a minimum overall band score of IELTS 6, or you hold a passport from one of the English-speaking countries. Is an overall band score of at least 6, so that final number with 5s across the board. You also must have applied for an Australian Federal Police check. I would always just recommend that you just do that and get that lodged. You can do that now. If you've got only a few months left of your study, you can jump onto the Australian Federal Police website and you can get your police check, and that's done. They're valid for a period of 12 months, so there's no reason why you couldn't do it prior to finishing your study, just as something that you can kind of start to tick off. Essentially, the regulations say that you only need to have applied for it, but it's best to just have it. It means your application is more ready for a decision. You must have adequate arrangements for health insurance. So as student visa holders, generally you must have overseas student visa health cover. And so you can call up your health insurer and say, hey, I'm going on to a 485. I'm going to need to change my health insurance from this date. So from the end of your student visa onwards. So they will be able to assist you with that. And obviously you need to meet the health and character requirements. Important with character requirements, if for some reason you have been before the court or you've had some charge against you or something during the life of your student visa, that would be something that you would need to provide further information on. Similarly, if you contracted any health conditions while you've been in Australia studying, then that is something that you'd also potentially need to disclose. So it doesn't mean that because when you do a 485, it is a new application, so any new circumstances must be added to the application. So let's have a look at the stream. So the graduate work stream, so you must satisfy the Australian study requirement, and that's what we went through a couple of slides ago. And the Australian study requirement must be met within the last 6 months. You must nominate an occupation on the skilled occupation list. Oh my goodness, I have a typo on my slides. I'll fix that before that comes to you. Nominate an occupation on the skilled occupation list. And this applies to all applications after the 1st July 2023. I'm going to have a guess and say that most of you are not applying for 485 visas in the next week or two. So I have sort of targeted these slides at what's going to happen. Whatever your qualification is closely related to the nominated occupation. Again, something like nursing, you would have done a Bachelor of Nursing. Something like law, you would have done a Bachelor of Law. Fairly obvious to be able to closely relate things. If you're a bit unsure, potentially speak to the student advisors, or I'm happy to have a chat as well to try and understand, is it actually closely related? A good way to find out if it's closely related is that the next criteria is that you must hold or have applied for a skills assessment. So if you can't get a skills assessment in the nominated occupation, then it might be the case that your qualification is not closely related to the occupation. So that's something to consider. And the graduate work stream, it might be a diploma, a bachelor, or a trade qualification that you have had. And that is compared to the post-study work stream, which is at least a bachelor degree or higher, so a master's, PhD. And you must also satisfy the Australian study requirement. Now, these criteria are additional to the main criteria. So it's common criteria always, plus these additional ones. So just keep that in mind. So post-study work stream, again, yeah, at least a bachelor degree. So we'll flick through to the next slide. Then you might have a look at, so a couple of people asked about the regional area type information. I can see why you're all very confused, because it is there is a lot of information on this. The sections in policy go for pages and pages and pages, but I have distilled it a little bit here for you. So you could be in either a regional centre or a other regional area, or a designated regional area. And there's actually postcodes that attach to both of those designations of both of those designation categories. And this little thing here is a link to that legislative instrument, which essentially when you open it, you'll be able to see what those postcodes are. So you can check the location on where you're studying and also where you're living. Importantly, the idea with the first visa, so if you're looking, so we're looking at the second year visa here. So if you're looking at your first 485, you must have an intention to live in a regional area and have lived in the regional area for at least 2 years. So that's just something to think about when you're applying for your first 485. And you may have worked in a regional area for at least 2 years. So some people don't work during study, so that's why it's a may have. And at the time of, and then when you're considering the second year, then all of these criteria apply. So it's a little bit confusing. So I understand if anyone needs a little bit more help on that one. But essentially, with the first 485, you should have an intention to live regionally and work regionally. And then when you're applying for the second or third 485, if you're focusing on this regional area aspect, you need to then start to provide evidence that you lived in a regional area, that you've worked in a regional area, and that essentially you're contributing to regional areas of Australia. Now, the only reason why this has come about is because what happens in Australia a lot of the time is that people end up migrating to capital cities, and what happens is then the regional areas don't necessarily get the benefit of having migrants in Australia. And so, excuse me, and so the regional area push is essentially to start to move people out of capital cities. Now, if you're studying at the Gold Coast and living at the Gold Coast, luckily for you, that is a regional area. So that is something to consider. If you've been living and studying in Brisbane, though, Brisbane is not a regional area. So that is something to consider. Now, there was a question around what if I studied at Gold Coast and I lived in Brisbane, or vice versa. Now, the requirements do technically say that you must be living and working in a regional area. It seems to be okay to have lived in the regional area. So say you're living at Gold Coast and studying in Brisbane. Sorry, I'm gonna move back from that. So it is very confusing from the Gold Coast, between the Gold Coast Brisbane side of things. So for all intents and purposes, Gold Coast is regional, Brisbane is not. So we're going to just kind of work on that premise. What I will say though is that these changes that are coming as of 1 July, it might be the case that there is some more flexibility around that. Now, I know that a lot of you, there's been a lot of disruption because we've got a bit of a housing crisis in Queensland at the moment. And it might be the case that, there could be submissions made or something like this. So I will, at the end of this pack, there is a link to be sign up to a newsletter, which is a newsletter that I send to my clients and to a database. So I will keep information running through that newsletter about what's happening in that world. And then if you kind of keep updated, you have the ability to go and sign up to that. So yeah, so apologies for if there's any confusion on that part. I can completely see why. But for all intents and purposes, Gold Coast is regional, Brisbane is not. If you're considering regional areas, though, it's pretty much anywhere that's not Brisbane, Sydney or Melbourne. All of Perth, pretty much everywhere from Northern Territory, South Australia and Perth, WA is regional. It's just really the capital cities on this side of the country that are not considered regional. So that might be something to consider when you are preparing your next steps, excuse me, and where you'd like to live or where you might like to be studying. Of course, we know you want to remain in Queensland because Queensland's the best place to live, but it is might not be possible, and you might consider other regional areas as to which might help you with these moving forward. Now, this is a table that the government has provided, and I put it in there just so it's a little bit more helpful for you. Again, with the resources that I will provide this, I'll put a little bit more information about this regional versus non-regional thing, and this will give you a little bit more information. So this is direct from government policy around what the stay periods could be for your qualification on a so PSW is post-study work stream visa. And then if you're looking at additional second or third post-study work visas, what the eligibility would be. So if you resided on your first 485 in a capital city, so Sydney, Brisbane or Melbourne, you wouldn't be eligible. If you lived and worked in you lived in a regional centre and then you studied in a capital city, you wouldn't be eligible. But then if you start to look down here, so designated city or major regional centre, then you could potentially get another extra year. But if you look down here and you've lived and studied in a regional area, then you might get an extra 2 years on a second post-study work stream graduate visa. So that table hopefully kind of dilutes the myth, the struggle to kind of understand. The government is very much trying to help students in this sense, but there is a lot of information out there that makes it all very confusing. So hopefully this will kind of help distill that a little bit for you. Now, the other one that we need to consider is the replacement stream. So that's for people that had issues as a result of COVID, couldn't meet the standard requirements. I'm not going to go into too much information on this because, again, it's got a little bit of confusing language. That's why I've kind of very detailed information on that slide. But the important thing to note here is that applications must be made before the 1st of January 2027. So that is, in 18 months, in 18 months, oh my goodness, not 18 months, in within the next 3.5 years. So they must be made. And so you must consider, if for some reason you need to go down the replacement stream pathway, then this is something to consider. They've also very clearly provided certain dates that have affected people. And whether you were inside or outside Australia will depend on what your criteria for application are going to be. So again, a little bit of a one that's causing a little bit of grief for people. So if that is something that you need a little bit more information on, I'm happy to have a conversation about people that fall into these a little bit more detailed or confusing situations where it's, I lived here or I worked here, or I had a visa, then I didn't have a visa, or I had a visa and I couldn't come to Australia because of COVID. So those types of conversations are really good ones I'm happy to have with you, so that you have the right information direct for your circumstances, because a lot of this is very general information. So if we flick through to the next slide, these kind of touch on a few different other questions that we had as well. So for a 485, do I need registration or licensing to be able to work in my nominated occupation? So interesting. Yes, you would in certain circumstances. So it's not a very clear answer, but yes, if your occupation needs registration or licensing, it's highly likely that for you to be able to do that job, you're going to have to get that registration or license. But the good news is there is specific pathways for people generally that are on graduate or subclass 485 visas, and you can get things like provisional registration where you're supervised in your work or your practice, and you can then move forward to full or complete registration once you've finished that provisional period. So it will very much depend on what your occupation is and how long, if you've got any work experience, when you finish your qualification, all of these things. And so it will very much depend on what the skills, sorry, not the skills, the registration body will say. So again, on that, the magical skilled occupation list that I'm going to give you, there is, you'll see when you put in your occupation, so say you put in occupational therapist and it pops up and it gives you what's called an ANSCO code. So that's essentially the number of your occupation, the name, the types of visas that you can apply for as an occupational therapist. And then it will give you as well the name of an entity and then or a link to an entity. That entity is the one that is going to assess your skills for that occupation, but generally is also the one that is the provider of the license or registration. And so that will help you drive your application for registration or license and be able to get in contact with that specific entity and have a conversation with them about where you're at in your career cycle and how you would go about getting your registration or license. So processing times have a really ridiculous time frame. So either 1 day or maybe up to 6 months. You've all been through the visa process before, so you know that it can be a bit of a sort of tumultuous period depending on what's happening in visa world at the time. But they do sort of say anywhere between, up to 6 months. What does that mean for people that say you have a visa expiring in 3 months? Obviously, when you see 6 months, it's a bit scary because it's impossible, that you're going to be able to get a visa within the next 3 months, for example, right? So the good thing is that as long as you apply as a lawful non-citizen, so that's essentially holding a substantive visa or a student visa, you'll be granted a bridging visa A where you apply for the visa inside Australia. So that's important. So Mooney mentioned earlier that people are going away on holidays and doing certain things and whatever. What you need to consider in your timing when you're thinking about your next steps for visas is the following things. So, A, when does my visa expire? Don't forget that because that's a very important day in your life. If you miss that and you're outside of the country, you cannot get back. If you miss that and you're inside the country, then you're unlawful in Australia. So also not a good outcome. So know when your visa expires because that is an important day in your life. B, know when the Australian study requirement is going to expire for you. So that essentially is 6 months. Within the last 6 months, you've met the Australian study requirement. If you go over 6 months, you no longer meet it. So that's the second big thing to consider. And then the third thing is, do I have enough time to go on holidays and come back to Australia and still be able to lodge my graduate visa, provided that I've met the Australian study requirement, got all my documents in order and all of the things. So when you're making super cool holiday plans, and I'm sure they're very, very, very well deserved, if you are graduating, just kind of make sure that you've considered your timing of things. And I know that you're all very highly intelligent beings, especially coming from Griffith University. So I'm sure you've mapped all that out, but that's when little things start to go wrong, when people are trying to rush with their visa side of things. So that's 3 big things to consider. So when does my visa expire? Do I have time to travel and still meet the Australian study requirements and apply for my visa? So 3 big things to consider. All right. So I'm sure there's a million questions on the 485 side of things. And we will start to answer questions as we get to that question and answer period at the end. And I'm supposed to stop talking in 2 minutes, but I'm going to run through this next little bit because I did want to give you a little bit more information on the additional visas that might apply to you. So this might be close to your 485, but it is good to start to think about where you're going. So as part of my practice, what I really like to do is I like to provide migration maps. So, you know, if you came to me and said, hey, Rachel, I want to be an Australian citizen, I go, all right, cool. It's probably going to take you 10 years, but we're going to get there. So let's apply for a student visa where we're working in an occupation that's on the medium to long-term skill shortage list. Let's then work towards, you know, getting sponsored on a 482. And then we can maybe work towards a permanent employer-sponsored visa. And then once you've done that, then we can look at citizenship. So there are certain pathways available depending on your occupation, where you're coming from, and what your migration goals are. So all of these options are not necessarily relevant or something that you would be eligible for, but things that you can start to tick over in the back of your mind as to where you would like to be going. So the first one is the subclass 482. This is the new version of the 457, if any of you had any dealings with that in the past. So this is the temporary skills shortage visa, and it must be that you must have an occupation on the skilled occupation list. So it doesn't have to be on the Mitzel or the Schnitzel. It can be on the Mitzel, the Schnitzel, or the roll. So it doesn't really matter which of those applies to you. It may lead to PR in certain circumstances, and you do need an employer sponsor. So that is something to consider. For certain passport countries, you may also need a skills assessment for this visa. So for example, no, I can't think of an example that's going to apply to bachelor level people, so I won't give you that. So may lead to a permanent visa. So that's something to consider, but employer sponsored may lead to a permanent visa up to 4 years, and is a temporary visa for the purposes of work. The subclass 189 or the 190, these are independent permanent visa options, and they require you to meet a points test. And what happens is, so you essentially insert your circumstances relating to age, English, qualifications, Australian study, work experience, all of these things, and then a magic number comes out the end, which is your points. And once you lodge that information through an expression of interest, you then go into a pool of other people like you, and then the government or the state or territory that you've nominated or chosen to be your nominator will make you an invitation to be able to apply for a visa or for state nomination. So it really depends on what's happening in the labour force or labour market in Australia at the time as to who's more likely to get invitations. During COVID, invitations completely dropped off. I think we got down to almost nothing, and now things have significantly picked back up again, which is great for all of you. But what you do want to have a look at is invitation rounds and understand, okay, so I have, 70 points maybe right now. There is a minimum of 65, so having 70 is pretty standard. But if you could get up to 90 points, 100 points, with work experience, qualifications, you can get points for becoming an accredited interpreter, things like this, right? So you can also get points for either being a single applicant or for your partner doing an English test and a skills assessment. So that one it takes a little bit of work, on your part or the part of your lawyer to really make sure the points are moved in the best way possible, and you are going about doing the most, appropriate things in a lead up to applying for that, like doing an English test and getting the absolute highest points, applying in the, prime time of age, so you get the highest amount of points. So that is something to consider as well when you're considering your migration journey. You might also consider the subclass 491. And the 491 is a regional independent work visa for occupations on the skilled occupation list. This visa is also points tested, and it requires a skills assessment. It is likely to lead to regional permanent residency. So generally, regional applications will be occupations that are, not on the medium to long-term skill shortage list, because if you could go down another pathway other than a completely regional path, then I would recommend that you do that. If you can't, then this does give you information that or, you know, a little bit of satisfaction, that you still have options. So these regional visas have only been created or rebuilt in the last few years, and now the permanent pathway is also available. So really depends on where you're at in your journey, but generally these things will come up after your subclass 485 and potentially after your extensions if you do fit those regional requirements. All right, so I'm going to fly through the next couple of slides so we can get to your budding questions. So the first thing that the last sort of thing that I wanted to touch on was working with a lawyer or a migration agent or a representative or whoever it's going to be. The first thing I will say to you is be careful who you choose to be your representative. I appreciate that going to someone that speaks the same language as you, or is, you know, someone that your friend worked with or whatever, is a good way to make you feel as comfortable as possible, but you want to make sure that they can help you get to your goals. I've unfortunately seen people get taken advantage of a little bit in the world of migration, especially at your level where you're transitioning and, you know, you've got a lot going on with trying to finish study, and you've been away. This is probably the first time you've been away from home, and, you know, finding solace in someone that, for example, speaks your language is really sometimes feels a bit more comfortable, right? So just be careful as to who you choose, because they will be the person that are representing you to the Department of Home Affairs, and you want to be able to trust them 100% that whatever they're putting forward for you is accurate, truthful, and the best possible application for you. So that's my just little warning. So when you actually go and sit down with someone though, what do you need to know? So I would always recommend that you need to set your intentions for what you want to do in Australia before you get to that meeting. So as I said, you know, if you came to me and said, hey, Rachel, I want Australian citizenship, and I'll say, cool, all right, well, what's happened so far? So then we look at your studies. Can we go on to the graduate visa? Is it worth trying to get a work visa straight off the bat? All of these things. So set your intentions for what you want, because then that will help you, whoever's helping you, to be able to consider what that map is. Then the second thing is to be flexible. So if you come to me and say, Rachel, I want to apply for Australian citizenship today, and you've just graduated from a 4-year bachelor, I'll probably tell you that that's unlikely that's going to happen. So you need to be flexible. So yes, the goal is to get to Australian citizenship, or just, you know, work in a role in Australia. Just be flexible. It might take slightly longer than you think it's going to, and there might be a few additional steps. But if you really stick at it, it's going to be, you know, 100% going to be worth it. The third thing is to get your documents in order. If you know you need to apply for a visa, or your visa is expiring, make sure your passport is valid. It doesn't have an expiry date that's passed. Make sure that your resume is up to date if you're applying for jobs and you're applying for a work visa. If you've got partner or children, ensure that you've got birth certificates and passports for all of those. If you have come into a relationship since being on a student visa and you want to end up applying together, then make sure you're compiling evidence of that relationship, so that you can be considered as in a relationship for your next visa application. So there's no point in going to a lawyer and saying, I want a visa, and you don't have a valid passport, you haven't done a resume for 10 years, and you're kind of just scraping through on your courses. It's helpful when you're putting in as much effort as possible, so that all of the documents that you need for a visa are easily accessed and you're able to sort of get into the application as quickly as possible. So that ties into the fourth one of know what your responsibilities are. So I can't sit an English test for you, but I can give you the direction as to where you need to go and get that English test. I can give you information on practice examinations, which English test I think is, well, from my client's experience, is the least intensive. I hear it's PTE academic is the more easy one. So just hot tip there. But know what your responsibilities are. I can't apply for your police clearances for you. There's things that are your job. And as long as you are very clear as to what your job is in this transaction, then things can kind of happen significantly smoother. Now, that's not to say that you can't call out a lawyer or representative that you don't think that they're helping you enough. Certainly ask questions, call them out if you think that you're not getting what you need. but just know what your responsibilities are as well. And then the fifth thing is to work as a team. So this is for whatever visa you end up applying for. If you happen to find love in Australia and you end up on a partner visa, that's awesome. Work as a team. So your lawyer is not out to get you. Your lawyer is trying to help you with your visa application, as is, and I appreciate that you see things on Facebook and you talk to people on campus and you talk to your friends who have been through the process. But and there's conflicting information. So 100% ask questions, but work within the aligned team that you have created for your visa process. So as I mentioned over here, teamwork makes the dream work. So it's always really helpful when everyone's kind of working and on the same page. Resources, as I mentioned, I am going to provide a list of them when you get these pack of slides. And I'm going to fly through, and then we're going to get to questions. So my apologies for going over time, everybody. Questions.
Thank you, Rachel, for your very comprehensive presentation so far. So what I might suggest you to do, if that is okay, should we just go through the questions that have been submitted from the bottom to top? That makes sense?
Sorry, what was that?
Would you be able to see the questions that has now been published?
Yes, I have, yes.
Yeah. Would it be possible if you can check the questions that's been submitted from the bottom, and then we can go over from the bottom to top?
From the bottom to top.
Yep.
Yes. So I can see the question is, the most recent one is from Shanaz. Is that right?
Let me see, Jeanette.
Or is this under, sorry, I might be looking at the wrong place. Sorry, everybody. This is all new to me, Q&A. It's all very exciting. Oh, here we go. Yep, no, I've got it. Ignore me, everybody.
Awesome. Yep.
Okay. My question is, so Bernardo, does it need to be within the last 3 years? Yes. Unfortunately, no. If you don't hold a passport from an English-speaking country, then English is the only way. English test is the only way to show your English language ability. It's very frustrating, especially if you've just gone and done a master's in information technology, which obviously you need to speak English for. But yes, you would need to provide an English test. The same thing goes with anyone for any visa, to be honest. That's just unfortunately how it is. Is there a difference in working hours restrictions between types of Stefania? Yes. Yes, I should have mentioned that. My apologies. So yes, there is slightly different work hours for PhD students. I can provide you that information directly if you get in touch as to exactly what that is if you have any queries. Ragesh, I don't know what GELI is. So yes, you would need to provide English evidence.
I'll just jump in there. GELI is our English Language Institute. So yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I assumed it was Griffith English, like, right. Okay. Thank you, Claire. Yes, okay. That makes sense. Lizma, I'm a Juris Doctor student. Should I apply for the graduate work stream or the postgraduate work stream? I would likely go with the postgraduate work stream, Lizma, because it's unlikely you're going to be able to get a skills assessment. Skills assessment. But feel free to reach out to me directly and we can have a chat about exactly what we should do. What are the visa options for PhD? If I completed my master's, can I still apply for any work visa or skilled visa? Sabana, if you've done a PhD and you've got a master's and you've been doing work experience and all these amazing things education-wise, then there could be other options available for you. So that slide that we were looking at around the 482, the 189, the 190, the 491, all of those things could potentially apply to you. So again, that's probably something, reach out to me directly and we can have a chat about what your visa map might look like, because you might be able to do certain things depending on what your PhD is in as well. So let's have a chat. Tajun. I knew someone was going to ask that, Tajun. Technically, no. Oh, the law clinics, if you're doing it as a part of your course, absolutely not. If you're doing something just for a little bit of work experience, I don't believe that it's going to cause an issue for you. Yeah. Correct. Yeah, that's right. So there's nothing in policy. So there's a lot of information around volunteer work for people that are holding different types of visas that are not student visas. But if you're doing it really just to kind of better yourself and you don't end up getting paid, then not such a big deal. And I'd be rethinking what you're doing if you're doing more than 48 hours of volunteer work anyway. Am I able to get a 485? Can my dependent, blah, 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 master's, apparently my dependent can only study 3 months max. Can my dependent study a 2-year master's course? And I would need to look into that to make sure I'm giving you the very clear information on your dependent studying a 2-year master's course. We can chat about that. It might be possible for potentially your partner's the better primary applicant that, and we can figure that out. Kaniaka, sorry if I'm absolutely pronouncing that wrong. The aged care industry labour agreement is something that a sponsor needs to get before they can sponsor anyone. And generally, the visas that would sponsor, the visa that agreement would end up sponsoring is a subclass 482. And for a subclass 482, you need at least 2 years of work experience. And so potentially no. So it really depends on how much work experience you've got and whether or not your employer or potential employer is one. Also, for a registered nurse, there's no real need to apply with an employer under the aged care industry labour agreement because it is an occupation on the list. So have a chat to me. I've got when we get to the end, there's going to be a consultation link for a free 15-minute consult to have a chat about particular situations. Kaniaka, we can have a little chat about why you would even be trying to go down that path, because nursing is a great occupation to sort of have. So, Barney, I am going to send you the skilled occupation list link, and that will give you that. And yeah, you can apply for as many visas as you want, but you want to just make sure that you don't get granted a visa that you don't want or that's less favourable after you get granted one that you do want. So if you, for example, got the 189, got the 189 first and then the 485 came after, you just need to, it's all about timing and the right story with immigration. So yes, technically you could do that, but again, I think I'd just be trying to map out exactly what your intention is and then figure out what the best way forward is. So many questions. I love this. Okay, hold on. No, it just lost. There we go. Okay. Janatul. Janatul, wow, 4 questions. All right. First one. Yes, you can apply for PR down the track. It does not matter when. If you decide to leave Australia after your PhD, you're not tied to Australia to be here forever. You would have to just have a look at particular options later down the track for work visas and then get to PR as best you can. If we get a job opportunity outside Australia and move away for our PhD, does this... sorry, I don't really understand question 2, John, at all, and we might have to have a chat about that. If someone is looking to get PR but not looking for citizenship, how much time do they have to spend in Australia per year? Jantul, there's not really an answer to that question. Essentially, if you're wanting to maintain, if you get permanent residency on the basis that you're working in Australia and you wanted to maintain that visa, you would need to remain in Australia, I guess, for more often than not. And I could give you some information as to why, but essentially what happens with a permanent visa is that you get granted a 5-year travel facility. And so you can travel in and out of Australia as much as you want. But then at the end of the 5 years, if you want to come back, or you want to leave Australia and come back, and you don't have citizenship, then you would need to apply for a resident return visa. And the resident return visa criteria say that you should essentially be usually resident in Australia unless some certain criteria apply. So again, we need to kind of understand your intention as to what you're looking at doing. And yes, you can apply from PR wherever you are in the world. It will just depend on which pathway for PR, what you're eligible for, and what your occupation is. What about visa doctors? Salah, are you referring to the 485 visa subclass? Can you just leave maybe a little Thyra? Where and how do you complete the English test? No, well, it's Thyra. You will get, so I would give you the information, for example, or your provider would give you the information as to which way you would go to go and get an English test, but there is information available on the department's website. I will also send something through on English testing in the resources for you, so that you've got that. So that's something that you would need to go and book for yourself. And generally it's in person, and you would need to do the test, take your passport, whatever, and then you get your results emailed to you and posted to you. Lizma, if your passport expires in 2025, no, that won't hinder your application for acceptance. If it expires, 5 days after you apply, then that's obviously a bit of a different story. But if Australia doesn't have a restriction on some countries. When you travel, you need 6 months on your visa. Australia just recommends that. We don't have an absolute must on the validity of your visa. Ragesh, I'm going to apply for a 485 in July, and my student visa is going to expire in August. While doing that, can I travel to my home country, and how? Ragesh, you would need to just ensure that you either apply before you leave and enter Australia while re-enter Australia while your student visa is still in effect, or leave Australia and come back before your student visa expires and then apply for your 485, or apply and get your bridging visa A, and then you could potentially apply for a bridging visa B that will give you travel rights to be able to return to Australia. A few different options there, Ragesh. So if either of those apply to you, please feel free to reach out for a consult, for just a 15-minute chat. We can confirm. Kanchana? Potentially, really depends, right? So for anyone that is looking to apply for PR in Australia, the visa criteria are going to apply to any application from any country in any occupation, right? So your ability to apply for a visa isn't limited to where you got your original qualifications or where your work experience is or whatever that looks like. It is linked to if you can meet meet the visa requirements. So that is what I was talking about earlier when I said I love to do those visa maps. So that is something that I would sort of dig into, Kanchana, and be like, all right, let's understand where your qualifications came from. Are they relevant to Australia, or are they, not relevant, equivalent to Australian qualifications? How do we make that work? Where do you want to work? What's your occupation? All of these things. So lots of things to consider, but the short answer is possibly. Duong? Duong, in certain circumstances, Potentially, but I would have to just absolutely confirm with the migration policy on that. I know for other visas, definitely, I do use PhD work experience because it's 100% relevant, given that you're at that, I guess, higher level of qualification. So yeah, we can have a little bit more of a chat from that. I'm also very impressed at how many PhD students are on this chat. What type of visa is required for a postdoctoral Mustafa, is that for a PhD? Do you mean for a PhD? If so, that is also a student visa if you're completing a PhD. Bernardo, your passport will not determine the length of your visa. So that it doesn't matter that your visa is going to expire a little bit quicker, a little bit sort of sooner than how long you want a visa for. Just ensure that you go and get a new passport and you update either via IMI account or via using a Form 929 to update your passport details, because you don't want to leave the country and then not be able to get back in for some reason, right? So once you issue, this goes for everyone. So once you issue a Form 929 or make an update in IMI account where it says change passport details, once you make that update, it then goes into the department systems. So what you don't want to have is an issue where there's dual kind of records for you as a visa holder because you've got different passports going around. So just ensure that you make the update to the department. Information asking. Nikolai, I think we need to have a chat because there's a lot of loaded questions in there as to what your situation is. Essentially, the short answer is when you're applying for any new visa, you need to meet the visa criteria. So that's health, that's character, that's relationship status, that's whatever it is. So potentially, like if there's health conditions or something like that that you're a bit worried about, then we can, then it might be the case that they would need to be disclosed on this application, and you'd have to potentially just get some additional health checks or something done, depending on what it is. Regarding the application charges, yeah, in some circumstances they weren't charging, but given that COVID is technically almost over, I guess, for all intents and purposes, visa-wise, that is the relaxation and transitional arrangements are very much easing off. And so we just need to, depending on at the time of application, it really depends on the day as to whether or not an application fee is going to be something that you have to pay. Pitch Bador, yes, as soon as you get your transcript, I would start thinking about it. But in the meantime, what you can do is you can get your Australian Federal Police clearance. You can do your English test if you haven't done one recently in the last 3 years. And then the process, once you actually lodge it, like I said before, it could be anything from 1 day up to 6 months. So just consider what that looks like for your personal circumstances. Jan, I think for you, a good thing to do would be look at the skilled occupation list, have a look at and try and start to use your qualifications and get into some work experience that might be in something more on the skilled occupation list. So I wouldn't completely discount hospitality. It really just depends on what the occupation is. So we can have a little, I'm happy to have a chat about what that could be for you. So the skilled occupation list is definitely the right place to start though, Jan, so you can figure out where you might sit. Sahanya. So yes, it's different. If it really depends on what the situation is at the time of application, and in some circumstances, say if you go for your second one, it could affect your ability to get a second visa based on where you resided prior to lodgement of the first one. So it's all very, very confusing. But potentially studying at Gold Coast and living in Brisbane is, yes, potentially going to affect not your eligibility for a 485, everybody. It's the eligibility for the second and third 485s. So it's not the eligibility for the first one. You don't have to be in a regional area for the first one. It's just for the second and third 485. So again, Senhanya, we can have a chat as to exactly what that looks like for you.
Hello, Rachel. So sorry to interrupt. Can I just quickly jump in? Yeah. I'm just noticing that we do have some comments coming from students. You say, hey, I did post my questions. However, my question hasn't been answered. So sorry, guys. I was meaning to mention this one at the beginning. I totally forgot that. So it's because your question wasn't being answered. That doesn't mean that we are ignoring your question. We're disregarding questions. I guess simply because some of the questions you submitted, that might be something to do with more like career advice, which I can offer at the end or later after we finish this session. We do also have some questions coming around what study option is the best for me, what kinds of job is the best for me. So which are not really directly related to what we are covering so far from Rachel. So what I'm going to do today, we will revisit those questions which hasn't been answered today, and then we will get back to you individually. But also we do have some very specific questions, individualized questions, which is hard for us to handle today because we really need to sit down one-on-ones. So if there's a case, if there's something to do with the visa related, again, like Rachel advised, please make sure you find a way to get in touch with Rachel and then and have some more professional, I guess, seeking out some professional help from Rachel, or we might be able to visit your questions and then see if we can get back to you individually too. That's it. I just wanted to quickly, remind
Thanks,
for everyone.
Mooney.
Over to you again.
Yes, we're 100% not ignoring anyone, but as you can imagine, with how many participants are on, there is lots and lots and lots of questions. So that is why there is a special secret link at the end of this, so you can all ask your budding questions directly to me if they are very specific. So Jushal's asked a question. I think it's, I don't know where I am now. I think I'm back. Oh, sorry, there we go. Jushal, you asked a question in the actual chat. And that kind of applies to everyone. How can you increase points? You increase points by getting work experience, applying when you're in the most perfect age bracket, by getting as high English as possible, by meeting the Australian study requirement. They're probably the big things that will actually happen. Will actually improve your points as students, or kind of future career persons starting to work into your visa journey. Kaniaka, I'm currently working as an undergraduate student nursing in a hospital. Is it covered under aged care to work unlimited hours? Thank you. Right, I see what you're asking. It will depend on who you're working with in that hospital, Kaniaka. And I would just have to absolutely confirm what the definition is of how they're considering that. I didn't have a look at that policy when I was, I haven't looked at that policy again, like sort of recently. So I would just need to absolutely confirm that for you.
Hello, Rachel. Thank you. It's me here again. Just a little comment from one student. We might just want to revisit the questions again. The student's name was Bones. Let me do my best to pronounce your first name correctly. If I don't, apologies. Bonzao Lee, which was just underneath from Nikolai's questions.
Oh,
it seems like we just missed that one. Would it be? Yeah, would it be okay?
I can go back. Yeah. Sorry, everybody. Nikolai.
So Bonzao Lee. The questions from Bonzao Lee.
Oh yeah, sorry, Bozali. I thought I saw your name. I thought that I'd already answered that one. Don't mind me. Yes, you can apply for a 482 and a 491 concurrently. I probably wouldn't though, to be honest. If you get the 485, then great. Get your work experience up as quickly as possible. If you can get sponsored, as a software engineer, I believe that's on the medium to long-term skill shortage list. So if you can get sponsored, I would take 482 as a preference over a 491, to be honest. If given your occupation, you could potentially apply for a 482 and a 189 concurrently. That would probably make more sense to me, because a 189 is a permanent visa, and that's really depending on your skill, your ability to get a skills assessment, and what your points would be. You've already got a positive skills assessment. So if you've got good points, I would do your 485. So you've obviously got your ability to remain in Australia and work. But yeah, potentially in the background, you've lodged an expression of interest for a 189. I wouldn't even bother with a 491 for you. Sorry, go back up to the top. New posts. Abel, I need to, with the PhD students, I'll need to, I genuinely wasn't expecting this many PhD students to be on this thing. There are so many people doing PhDs. I wanted to do a PhD and everyone told me it was going to be insane. So kudos to all of you. I will, in the pack that I send out to all of you after this, I'll put in specific work around PhD students and their partners. Just writing that down. Alrighty. On the occupational list, it says IP lawyer. Doesn't have any obviously working on IP firm, insurance issues. Tau, there is, I'm not sure what you mean by that, but the occupation that you would be looking at is a solicitor. IP lawyer is not a specific occupation. I would be looking at solicitor, and like me, like I'm a migration lawyer. It's migration lawyer wouldn't be on the skilled occupation list. I would apply as a solicitor, and then you can essentially go and practice in anything that you want. So in Australia for law, you get registered as a solicitor generally, get admitted as a solicitor generally, and then you have the freedom. Sorry, not Australia, or Queensland, more rightly, you have the ability to then go and practice in whatever law you like. So if you want to do IP, then that's completely up to you, but you still need to go down the solicitor pathway. Will as partners whose blah, blah, blah. Jan, if that New Zealand citizen is willing to get a skills assessment and do an English test, sure. Good questions, everybody. Anyone else?
Thank you, Rachael. I think that's pretty much the end of the, I guess, the questions so far for today. But again, thank you so much for taking up your time today and presenting such a really valuable, comprehensive information, but also really appreciate your assistance addressing some of the live questions we have received so far here. Let me just revisit the chat here. Yes, and also thanks to Belinda, who's my colleague. Actually, we just noticed that we have quite a bit of number of students who are doing PhD, which is fantastic. So just a little gentle reminder, actually, from my lovely colleague here, Belinda, we are actually putting together, running another specific visa sessions for you, PhD candidate. So just make sure you bookmark this date. It's going to be happening during the trimester 2 in September. So this might be a really good way for you to also get some more, I guess, engagement from us too. And again, just the final reminder here, for those of you who submitted your question, somehow your question wasn't been moderated or published, it's not like we are ignoring your questions, so please don't take it personally or don't get disheartened. We will revisit your questions and get back to you, simply because your question might be something that our team, as a Career Employment Service team, but also my colleague Claire from our International Student Advisor team will be able to handle and get back to you individually. Okay, so if there's any no further comment, anything like that, can we just take this opportunity just to give a big shout out to Rachael for her amazing presentation. I'm just going to quickly try to use my emoji if I can clap here. Applause. Thank you very much, Rachael, and thank you for those everyone for your engagement. So if you can just bear with me for 1 more minute, I do have 2 more slides that I'd love to share with you.
I've got a couple more too, Mooney. If
Awesome.
I can just,
Yeah, go for it.
which is really just how they reach out to me, which is what's happening
the most important part,
now.
of course. Yes.
Yeah, cool. All right. So what are your next steps? So everyone's next steps are going to be different. As I said, I didn't realize there'd be that many PhD students here today. I'm genuinely impressed by all of you, the PhD students next level. So I will put some additional information in this pack about PhDs, work rights, all of those things based on the questions that we had today. But everyone needs to consider, I guess, what their next steps are before their visa expires. So start to make a plan and start to align what your career steps are based on your study, based on potentially if you want to be here, look at the skilled occupation list, all of those things. And this is how you reach out to me. So I am going to be sending through a link where you can book via my website that will be for Griffith students specifically. So it'll be a free 15-minute consultation. I'm going to open up my calendar completely for a period of 2 weeks. And that's going to be essentially all open for not PhDs, for everybody, for all Griffith students to be able to sit down 15 minutes with me and have a one-on-one conversation about exactly what that looks like and what your game plan is going to be moving forward. So that link will come when my pack comes out. I'm going to make a few amendments to the pack so that it covers off the things that we've talked to today. I also have a YouTube channel, as Mooney mentioned, which you can subscribe to. And if you go onto the website, when you're making the booking form, please don't forget you can subscribe to the newsletter. And that will also keep information happening around migration updates, particularly as they come out around 1 July, because things are just getting a bit crazy in immigration world in Australia at the moment. So this is how you can contact me, hello@passageco.com.au. Just make sure you tell me that you're a Griffith student so I can have a little bit of context. And then, yeah, give me whatever you need. Diver Migration Lawyer on Instagram, my name on LinkedIn, business name on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm everywhere. So if you Google me, the first page of Google is me. So there's no shortage of being able to get in contact. So thank you all for having me. I appreciate you getting in touch.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Big thanks to you, Rachael, again. And also, I really appreciate that you are providing this such a good exclusive offer for our students, Griffith students only, to be able to get back in touch with you and having the one-on-one consultation. And thank you so much for your generosity for that. Also, today is really giving up your time and providing this webinar for our students. Thank you, Rachael. Now, everyone, I do have 2 more slides to share with you. Just to bear with me for 1 more minute. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm going to try and stop sharing. Am I stop sharing, Mooney?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, cool. Great. Sorry, don't mind me.
Great. Okay, what I love to do, I assume you all have mobile phone with you. So really encourage you to, if you could just quickly access your mobile phone, just to scan this QR code, because what we love to do with you is to really hear from you on how we can best run such a session like this for our trimester 2 and even next year. So we really love to hear from you, get some feedback on that. And then my last slide for you, which is very important thing that I'm sharing with you today. So for those of you who are joining today, you are actually ahead of game because we haven't started official promotion yet, but you are actually ahead of game accessing this information, which is about what's going to happen for trimester 2. Did you know we are actually going to offer international student focused career series exclusively, specifically for you as an international student at Griffith University. We are preparing very exciting career panel sessions. We are going to invite a range of different Griffith successful alumni who are also going through a similar journey like you as a former international student, but also for those of you who actually return to their home country and then really willing to share some really good insight or advice on how you can actually land it in your dream job. So please make sure you actually access this QR code and bookmark. We do have over 12 different exciting activities and events and webinars ready for you throughout the trimester 2. So make sure you actually take advantage of this activity, which are free and available for you as a Griffith University students. Okay, and I can see Rachael has also shared some relevant links as well as her email address here. Again, big thanks to Rachael, and thank you so much for everyone joining us today. And I wish you always all the best. That's pretty much bring us to the end of today's, I guess, formal webinar. So I will say enjoy your afternoon and then have a good week. And then I wish you all the best. Bye.